this video, we'll see how we can add values from a pivot onto our dashboard. So these are the values that we're going to populate: the total disbursements, the good loan, and the bad loan percentage. Okay, so we can either use formulas or we can use pivots for this purpose. But in our example, we're going to use pivots. Okay, so coming back here, we already have a sheet where we have pivots. So rather than creating different sheets, we could just rename this for now. I'm going to call it pivots, and we're going to add the new pivots on the same sheet. So to make it easier for us to add new sheets and make it easy for us to understand what is their nature, these pivots, it's also possible for us to create a name for the pivot. So that's what we can do. So if I click on a particular pivot and select pivot table analyze, from the pivot table tab, you have the option of renaming your pivot table. So we'll just add a simple prefix here called PVT, and then I'll just say months, for example. Okay, so there you go. Now, let's say I want one more pivot to be created. The only thing that you need to do is just do a copy paste. Perfect. We'll just leave a few column spaces and create the new pivot table. So the second pivot table that we want requires the total number of loans that have been dispersed, but at the same time also need to understand the good loan and bad loan percentage, right? So keeping that in mind, I will add the loan status to the rows section here. I'll remove the date, which I will not need for this particular requirement. Perfect. So I get exactly what I was looking for. So I get to see the count of the customers, right? Perfect. So what is the other aspect that I was looking for? So now the thing is, this is only taken for specific months, if you notice. So let's go and change that here. Let's change it for all the months. Okay, so now I get my entire data set because it was copied from another pivot. So it'll take the loan issue date as well. Okay, so we've got that fixed. So now this is for the entire data set, 24,642 rows. Now with that sorted, I get the total count, but what if I need to see the loan amounts as well? So we can add as many values as we want. So I could just click and drag the current loan amount here inside the values section. So I have one column which is showing the count and another column which is showing the values. So the first thing that I wanted over here in the dashboard is the total disbursement of loans. So I can just use the equal to symbol here, come back to my pivot and click on the value that contains the grand total there. Perfect. That's it. So we are getting the total value show up. So now if I were to make a change in my slicer, if I were to reduce this to say the first quarter, the first 3 months, you can see that the value is changing in the total disbursements. Okay, so we'll see a little more about that as to how it's actually working once we complete the good loan and the bad loan values here. Okay, so coming back to our pivots. So let's say we want the percentage to show up. So I could show a percentage either for the total number of customers or for the total loan amount. So I could choose against what I want to see a good loan, bad loan percentage. So let's say for our example, I'm going to use the count. So I can maintain the count here and drag the customer ID once again. So I'll have this repeated. So one of them I can go and change. For example, I can go to value field settings. So by default, it's showing the count. I can select the option here where it says show value as. So there is a tab there. And I can change this to show a percentage of the grand total. There you go. And if I click OK to that, so depending on the count of the customers, I'm seeing that about 30% of customers have defaulted, while the remaining have fully paid off their loan. So I can actually show these percentages on my dashboard. So let's go in and do that. So I'll say equals, click on my pivot and select 70% for the good loan and the 30% for the bad loan. Okay, perfect. That's done. So now based on my selection, how are these values actually changing? So now you would think that, okay, it is consistent for all the months. That is why we are not seeing any change over here, but the total disbursements are definitely changing. So how is the slicer getting actually connected to this? So it is not actually by default. The thing is, if you right click on the slicer, there is a report connections option that will show up. So over here, you can actually see what different pivot tables is it connected to. Okay, so you can see that over here. So if there are more pivot tables in your file, it will show up. So now there are some additional pivot tables which are not visible right now, but if you go to the bottom, there are two pivot tables, the PVT months that we created and the new pivot table that we have. So, rather than keeping it as pivot table 3, 4, and so on, you could rename them as well. So what happens here is these are the two pivot tables that we have on this particular sheet. And the slicer, when we make changes to it, it updates the contents in those pivot tables. So obviously, those pivot tables are the ones feeding your dashboard and they will change accordingly. So let's also go and change the name of this pivot table rather than maintaining it as pivot table 3. So let's go back here and go and change it. Pivot table analyze, pivot table, let's keep that same prefix, pvt underscore, let's call this loan status. Perfect, right? So we are done with this section. In the next video, we'll explore how we can add charts onto our dashboard. So thank you for watching.